Before Michael Jackson became the king of pop, before the moonwalk, before Thriller, before his face was on every television screen on the planet, Berry Gordy looked at a young boy from Gary, Indiana, and made a decision that most people still don't fully understand. He looked at that boy's name, the real name, the family name, and he decided it wasn't going to work, not because the name was bad.
Walk around this town with your head all up in the sky.
But because Berry Gordy had a plan so calculated, so far ahead of anything happening in music at that time, that the name was only the first piece of it. Stay with us through all 10 reasons, because the final one will completely change how you see Michael Jackson's entire career. Reason number 10. The name was the product, not the people here, is something most people never stop to think about. When Berry Gordy signed the Jackson 5 to Motown Records in 1969, he was not just signing 5 brothers from Gary, Indiana. He was not signing a group of talented kids who could sing and dance. He was signing a brand. And in Berry Gordy's world, the world he had spent over a decade building from nothing, the brand was always more valuable than the human beings attached to it. Gordy had not built Motown by accident. He had built it by understanding one fundamental truth about the entertainment business. The public falls in love with names. Diana Ross, the Supremes, the Temptations, the Four Tops. These were not just artists, these were products. Carefully packaged, meticulously controlled, strategically deployed products that generated millions of dollars and made Motown the most successful black-owned business in American history up to that point. So when the Jackson 5 walked through that door, Gordy did not see 5 boys, he saw an opportunity. 5 photogenic brothers, the youngest one a walking supernova of raw talent, performing with a maturity and magnetism that nobody his age had any business possessing. Gordy moved immediately. He trademarked the name. He made sure that if these boys ever outgrew Motown, if they ever got bigger than the label, if they ever decided they wanted creative freedom or better royalties or a different direction, they could not take the one thing the public already loved with them. They could not take their own name. Think about what that actually means. The name was the anchor. The name was the history. The name was what mothers told their daughters and what teenagers wrote on their notebooks. And it belonged to Berry Gordy, not the Jacksons. That is not just a business decision. That is a cage built with legal language. And the Jacksons were already inside it before they ever heard the door click shut behind them. Reason number 9. Gordy rewrote their origin story before the first record dropped. If you want to understand how Berry Gordy thought about control, you do not start with the contracts. You start with the story he told the world about how the Jackson 5 were discovered. Because what he did in those first few weeks of signing this group tells you everything you need to know about the man and his methods. The official Motown narrative, the one that ran in press releases, magazine features, and television interviews, was simple and beautiful. Diana Ross discovered the Jackson 5. She saw these 5 brothers perform, fell in love with their talent, and personally brought them to Berry Gordy's attention. It was a fairy tale, warm, cinematic, perfectly constructed, and it was almost entirely fabricated. The real story is far less glamorous but far more interesting. Bobby Taylor, a Motown recording artist, is the person who actually saw the boys perform and brought them to Gordy's attention. But Gordy looked at Diana Ross, the crown jewel of his entire empire, and saw a marketing opportunity that was too powerful to ignore. Attaching her name to the Jackson 5's origin story gave them instant credibility, instant glamour, and instant entry into the Motown mythology that Gordy had spent a decade carefully constructing. So he changed history, publicly, deliberately, and nobody stopped him because nobody could stop him. Now sit with that for a moment. If Berry Gordy was willing to rewrite factual, documented reality within the first weeks of signing this group, if he was willing to erase the real story and replace it with a more useful one, then what else was he willing to rewrite? What other documents, what other agreements, what other conversations were shaped entirely by his vision of how this should go? The trademark on the Jackson 5 name was the legal instrument, but the real control started here, with the story. Gordy was writing the Jackson 5's history from day one, and the boys whose name was on the marquee were not the ones holding the pen.
If you enjoyed this video, we invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update, and the real stories behind the music that built the world we live in. Don't miss the next one. We will see you there. Back to the countdown.
Reason number 8. The Motown machine had already perfected this system long before the Jacksons arrived. You cannot fully understand what Berry Gordy did to the Jackson 5 without understanding what he had already done to everyone else who came before them, because the trademark was not an innovation. It was not a new idea that Gordy invented specifically for Michael and his brothers. It was the latest application of a system he had been refining for over a decade, and that system was total. Motown in the 1960s was not simply a record label. It was a finishing school, a production factory, and a carefully constructed feudal system, all operating simultaneously under one roof on West Grand Boulevard in Detroit. Artists who signed to Motown were groomed from the inside out. There were charm school classes, etiquette training, choreography rehearsals that went on for hours until every movement was exactly right. Artists were told what to wear, how to speak in interviews, which political opinions to keep entirely private, and which songs to record, even when they personally hated every word. The creative control was not partial, it was absolute, and the financial architecture was designed with the same level of intention. Many Motown artists discovered years, sometimes decades later, that they had earned a fraction of what they were legally entitled to. Royalty structures were crafted to benefit the label first and the artist last. Publishing rights, which represent the most durable and most valuable asset in the entire music ecosystem, were almost universally retained by Gordy's companies, rather than by the people who created the music. The Supremes experienced this. The Four Tops experienced this. Marvin Gaye spent years in a painful public battle with Gordy for creative autonomy, and that struggle nearly consumed him entirely. So when the Jackson 5 arrived in 1969, they were not walking into something new. They were walking into a system that had already been tested, refined, and legally fortified over 10 years of operation. The trademark was just the newest version of the same blueprint. The Jacksons were talented enough to make the system look like a gift. It was not a gift. Reason number 7. Joe Jackson walked his own sons directly into the trap. Every conversation about who controlled Michael Jackson's early life starts with Joe Jackson, and that is fair. Joe was the architect of the family's ambition. He was relentless, demanding, and by almost every account, a terrifying presence in that household on Jackson Street in Gary. He drilled those boys with a ferocity that bordered on cruelty. He held the vision of their success in one hand and the threat of consequences in the other. He built something remarkable through methods that left permanent marks on every one of his children. But here is the part of Joe Jackson's story that rarely gets the attention it deserves. When Joe brought his sons to Berry Gordy, he believed with everything in him that he was winning. He believed he had outmaneuvered a music industry that had chewed up and discarded black artists for generations. He thought he had found the door to everything he had sacrificed for, and Joe was not naive. He understood that show business was ruthless terrain. He had watched enough careers collapse to know that this world had no mercy. What Joe did not understand, what he could not have fully understood, was that Berry Gordy was operating at a level of legal and financial sophistication that Joe Jackson was simply not equipped to match in that negotiating room.
Shake your body now to the ground. Let's dance. Let's shout, shout.
Gordy had spent 10 years building Motown, which meant 10 years of crafting deals that looked generous in the headline and buried the real leverage 3 pages deep in language that required a specialist to decode.
'Cause I do know that I want you.
Joe saw opportunity, Gordy saw structure, Joe signed. And in signing, he handed Berry Gordy something more powerful than any single royalty clause.
Shake your body now to the ground. Let's dance. Let's shout, shout.
He handed him the key to the family's collective public identity, the name, the brand, the thing the whole world would come to love.
Turn with your head on up in the sky. And you do know.
Joe Jackson pushed his sons to greatness with everything he had. But in that one meeting, in that one signature, he gave away the one thing he never should have let go of.
To get closer to your soul. And you do know that.
And by the time the boys were old enough to understand what had happened, it was already done.
I lit the fire inside of me. And you do.
Reason number 6, Michael understood something was wrong before anyone around him did. Michael Jackson was 11 years old when the family signed to Motown. 11. A child by every legal and practical definition. But the people who were in those rooms, who watched him in those early years, who stood next to him in rehearsals and studio sessions and label meetings, they all say the same thing. Michael was absorbing everything. Not just the music, not just the choreography, everything. The conversations in the hallway, the way adults changed their tone when certain topics came up. The numbers that were mentioned and the numbers that were conspicuously never mentioned. By the time Michael was in his mid-teens, he had begun asking questions that made people uncomfortable. Questions about where the royalty money went. Questions about who owned the songs they recorded. Questions about what publishing rights actually were and why the label always seemed to hold them instead of the artists. These were not the questions of a restless teenager who wanted more spending money. These were the questions of someone who had started to map the machinery behind the curtain and did not like what he was finding. People close to the Jackson family during those years have described a growing tension in Michael, specifically around creative control and financial transparency. The songs he was given to record, the image decisions that were made without his input. But underneath all of it, threading through every frustration, was the deeper issue. The issue of ownership. Who owned the work? Who owned the name? Who owned the thing that Michael was putting his entire being into every single day? The trademark situation planted a seed in Michael Jackson that never stopped growing. It was his first real education in the oldest lesson in the music business, that there is a profound and devastating difference between creating something and owning it. That lesson burned into him, and it explains, with almost surgical precision, every major business decision he made for the next 3 decades. Including the one that shocked the entire world when he bought the catalogue that contained the Beatles' music. Michael learned ownership the hard way. He learned it at Motown. He learned it because Berry Gordy owned his name. Reason number 5, leaving Motown meant leaving their own name behind at the door by 1975, the decision had been made. The Jacksons were leaving Motown Records. And that decision, one of the most consequential departures in the entire history of popular music, was made with full knowledge of exactly what it would cost them, because the trademark was not a technicality. It was not something that could be negotiated away in a separation agreement. Berry Gordy owned the name the Jackson 5, and when those boys walked out of Motown, the name stayed behind. Understand what that means in real tangible terms. 6 years of recorded history. 6 years of hit singles, television performances, sold-out concert tours, Saturday morning cartoons, action figures, lunchboxes, magazine covers, and the kind of cultural saturation that brands spend billions trying to manufacture artificially.
Don't blame it on the sunshine. Don't blame it on the moonlight.
The Jackson 5 were one of the most recognized groups on the face of the planet. Children in countries that had never heard of Gary, Indiana, knew that name.
I don't blame it on the good times. Blame it on the boogie.
And every ounce of that recognition, every bit of that love, belonged in part to a trademark that Berry Gordy held.
That nasty boogie bugs me, but somehow it has
They signed with Epic Records. They became the Jacksons, singular, no number, a slight but unmistakable shift.
drugged me. Spellbound rhythm gets me on my
And while the world adapted quickly enough, because Michael's talent made every obstacle, temporary the change, was a permanent reminder.
feet. I changed my life completely. I sing the
Every time a DJ said the Jacksons, every time a reporter wrote it, every time a fan had to explain to someone why the name was different now,
lightning lit me. My baby just can't take her eyes off me.
Berry Gordy's control echoed through the silence where those two words used to be. And Gordy did not simply sit on that trademark passively. The name was a commercial asset. It could be licensed.
I don't blame it on the good times. Blame it on the boogie.
It could be attached to compilations, to marketing campaigns, to historical retrospectives that the brothers had zero input on.
That nasty boogie bugs me.
The Jacksons moved forward because that is what survivors do. But the price of their freedom was paid in their own name.
Somehow it has drugged me. Spellbound rhythm gets me.
And that price was set by a man who understood before almost anyone else that in the music business, the name is often worth more than the people who made it famous. Reason number 4, the trademark gave Gordy leverage that outlasted the relationship by decades. When people talk about the Jacksons leaving Motown, the story is usually framed as a clean break. They left, they rebuilt, they thrived. Michael became the biggest solo artist in the history of recorded music. The chapter closed. But trademark ownership does not care about chapter breaks. It does not expire when a business relationship ends. And Berry Gordy's hold on the Jackson 5 name continued to generate real structural power long after the brothers had moved on with their lives and careers. Consider the reunion conversations. Over the years, there were many. Some public, some private, some that nearly happened, and some that fell apart entirely. Every single time the idea of a Jackson 5 reunion surfaced, every time a promoter, a label, a documentary producer, or a broadcast network wanted to use that original name, they had to navigate Berry Gordy's ownership. He was not a passive holder. The trademark was leverage at every negotiating table, even ones he was not officially sitting at. His absence from the room did not mean his power was absent from the room. This is the aspect of intellectual property control that most people, even people inside the music business, underestimate. Owning a name means owning a narrative gateway. Any project that wanted to tell the definitive story of the Jackson 5 era. Any greatest hits package that wanted to use that branding. Any biographical film or television special that needed to present those years authentically. All of it ran through Gordy's ownership in some form. He controlled the framing of a period of history, and he who controls the framing controls the story. There is also a psychological dimension here that should not be ignored. Knowing that your name belongs to someone else does something to a person. It is a constant, low-frequency reminder of who held the power when it mattered most. Michael Jackson went on to become perhaps the most powerful individual artist in the history of the music business. But the name of the group where it all started still lived in someone else's filing cabinet. That knowledge does not fade, it sharpens with time. Reason number 3, the trademark permanently shaped Michael's obsession with ownership. Now we get to the thread that connects everything, because this is not just a story about a trademark. This is a story about how one legal document, filed by one man in one city in 1969, redirected the entire trajectory of Michael Jackson's relationship with the music business for the rest of his life. The through line is direct, it is documented, and it is one of the most compelling cause and effect relationships in the history of popular culture. Michael Jackson spent his adult life becoming one of the most sophisticated music business operators the industry had ever produced. Not in spite of what happened at Motown, because of it. He hired attorneys who specialized in intellectual property and sat with them for hours learning the difference between a master recording and a publishing right, between a synchronization license and a mechanical royalty. He read contracts, he asked follow-up questions. He retained information and connected dots across deals and across years in ways that stunned the executives who were used to artists simply signing what was put in front of them.
Somehow, some way.
In 1985, Michael Jackson purchased ATV Music Publishing for approximately $47 million. That catalog contained the publishing rights to more than 250 Beatles compositions. The purchase sent shockwaves through the entire music industry. Executives who had dismissed Michael as a performer rather than a businessman suddenly had to reckon with the fact that he had just outmaneuvered almost everyone in the room. But Michael was not surprised by the opportunity. He had been preparing for exactly that kind of move since he was a teenager watching Berry Gordy own the Jackson 5 name. His attorney John Branca and others in his inner circle have confirmed that Michael was extraordinarily, almost obsessively, focused on the concept of ownership. He turned down deals that would have made him significantly wealthier in the short term, when those deals required surrendering publishing rights. He understood from lived, painful first-hand experience that the real money, the lasting money, the generational money, lives in ownership. Not in performance fees, not in royalty checks, in the underlying rights that generate income forever. Berry Gordy gave Michael Jackson his masterclass. He just never intended to.
Even though you're gone.
Reason number 2, the trademark exposed a broken system that had been destroying black artists for generations. What happened to the Jackson 5 at Motown was not a one-time event. It was not an anomaly or an exception or a story unique to this one remarkable family. It was standard industry practice, dressed in sequins, presented as opportunity, and delivered with a smile warm enough to make you forget to read the fine print. And that is precisely why it matters beyond just this one family's experience. It is a window into something much larger and much older and much more deliberate. The history of black music in America is, in significant and uncomfortable part, a history of black artists generating extraordinary cultural wealth, and then watching the business structures around that culture extract the financial value from their hands and deposit it somewhere else. This pattern did not begin with Berry Gordy. It runs backward through the soul explosion of the 1960s, through the birth of rock and roll in the 1950s, through the rhythm and blues era all the way back to the blues musicians of the early 20th century who created the foundation of everything that came after and received almost nothing for it. Artists created the culture, others owned the infrastructure around the culture, and the infrastructure, the labels, the publishing houses, the trademark registrations, the distribution networks, that is where the lasting money lived. Berry Gordy was himself a black man who built an empire in an era when the barriers to doing so were almost incomprehensibly high. His achievements were real, historic, and genuinely remarkable. The But the internal power dynamics he constructed at Motown, the control over image, the retention of publishing, the suppression of royalties, the ownership of names, those dynamics did not challenge the extractive system that had harmed black artists for decades. In many ways, they replicated it. Michael Jackson understood this not as an abstraction, but as a personal truth. That is why, in the later years of his life, he spoke about the music industry with a level of directness and anger that surprised people who only knew him as an entertainer. He named the pattern, he identified it clearly. He had not read about it in a book, he had lived it. Starting at age 11, starting with a name that was never truly his. Reason number one, the real reason and the miscalculation that defined Berry Gordy's legacy. We have arrived at the top. And the truth sitting at number one is both simpler and more devastating than anything that came before it. Because when you strip away the legal language, when you remove the trademark filings and the royalty structures and the contract clauses, what you are left with is this. Berry Gordy trademarked the Jackson 5 name because he needed to believe that the name was where the magic lived. That the Motown system was the engine, that without Berry Gordy there was no Jackson 5 worth having. He had built an entire empire on that belief, and for a decade that belief had been validated at every turn. Artists who left Motown often struggled to recapture their earlier success. The system worked. Gordy was the architect. The label was the star. That was the Motown gospel, and it had never once been proven wrong. Until Michael Jackson proved it wrong completely, permanently, in front of the entire world. When Michael left, when he went to Epic Records, when he released Off the Wall and the world paid attention. And then when he released Thriller and the world stopped entirely, the biggest selling album in the history of recorded music, a cultural event so enormous that it did not just break records, it relocated the ceiling. Berry Gordy's argument collapsed. The system had not made Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was Michael Jackson before Motown found him, while Motown had him, and in a completely different dimension after Motown lost him. The trademark on the Jackson 5 name had been Gordy's insurance policy, his guarantee of ongoing relevance and control. But you cannot trademark a human being. You cannot file paperwork on a voice, on a gift, on whatever combination of spirit and talent and obsessive dedication produced the thing that Michael Jackson was. The name the Jackson 5 still lives in Motown's catalog, but the name Michael Jackson belongs to history itself. No contract, no clause, no registration number could contain what he was. Berry Gordy was a genius. A genuine, historic, world-changing genius, but even geniuses miscalculate. And his greatest miscalculation was believing that owning the frame gave him ownership of the painting. He never owned the painting. Nobody ever did. Michael Jackson was never anybody's asset. He was always completely, entirely, and only his own.
If you enjoyed this video, we invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And the real stories behind the music that built the world we live in. Don't miss the next one. We will see you there.